How's it going, everyone? I'm your host, Drake Foley, and welcome to the Whether or Not podcast. This week, we're going to bring you something special with a special guest from ApexStorm, Donovan Neal. But first, I want to talk about some stuff that we had this last weekend. So, me and some of the other SUSCORE members traveled down to Texas, and we went on our first chase of 2021. The Panhandle is not the most fun place in the world. I definitely would like to, say that. But we saw a lot of cool weather while there. We saw our first tornado. It was a beautiful rope tornado. It was more of a spin up, I guess you could say, but it was very good, nice looking. Although it got rain wrapped, but minutes later it became a confirmed tornado in the area of Groom, Texas. We also saw a rain wrapped wedge. Like it was in front of us, but we didn't see it. But it on radar, it was right in front of us. We didn't figure that out till later. But it was a pretty good, time. Other than that, there was also a severe weather outbreak in Alabama, a tornado outbreak to be exact. I believe they're at 40 plus confirmed tornadoes now, which is pretty insane because a lot of people were calling the weather a bust. And I couldn't consider any weather system a bust as long as it produces weather. And for a high risk, a lot of the tornadoes were in that area. And although my co host Colin isn't here right now, he will be in here during the interview, and we will get to hear some of his thoughts about the weather, and as well as our special guest Donovan Neal. So I will be back with you on the flip side. Welcome back to the Whether or Not podcast. I'm your host Drake, along here with my co-host Colin, and we have a special guest today.
Yes, we have Donovan Neal from the ApexStorm forecasting team from SMU University, from Dallas, from Arlington. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite all right. I'm very, very ecstatic to be in a podcast environment because it's been about 4 years since I've been a guest in another podcast, so I'm glad to be doing this again.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you because, you and I have been friends for a little bit now, and we do, obviously, the ApexStorm stuff together. So I'm excited to just kind of talk with you a little bit and get some of your takes on student forecasting and forecasting in general, and just providing some unique insight to the weather community.
Well, I've got a cousin named Unique, so it runs in my blood. So that's one of the things I really love about just weather forecasting in general is that you can you can experiment with your own avenues within reason, of course. But yeah. I just like the uniqueness of it.
Yeah. So just go ahead, just tell, I guess, everyone who's listening just a little bit about yourself and kind of, I guess, how you got into weather. And then we'll talk a little bit more about ApexStorm.
Sure. Well, first off, I think it is important that everyone knows that I am a music major. I'm a double music major actually at Southern Methodist University. So of course not majoring in meteorology, but I still maintain my weather forecasting products. I play bassoon. I've been doing so for almost 10 years now, and my interest in weather has expanded beyond the 10-year mark. Of course, everyone has the typical story of when they were younger, they were like really, really intrigued by just a random thunderstorm that just coincidentally happened to be there at the Walmart parking lot, and ever since that they decided to like weather and meteorology, or maybe just like a certain tornado event that they went through, that their region went through on a specific day when they were young. And of course that planted a seed, and that seed happened to blossom in their teenage, high school, and college years. Well, I'm a part of I guess what you call that typical crowd. I've been interested in weather since I was in Abilene way back when. And of course, I didn't really start to take it real seriously until at a very young age, when I was 13, eighth grade in middle school. That's when I started doing. That's when I really started doing forecasts for, my class and my friends and everything. Walk down the hall, they ask what the weather is. I usually do a good job of telling them. But I really didn't get into the social media forecasting section until really freshman year of high school, which is pretty much 4 years ago. And that's when I started. That's when I created the Apex WX website and my Twitter handle, and now I'm on Facebook. And I used to do Texas weather discussion videos, which is very similar to the ABC 3340's weather extreme videos that James Spann does every weekday.
Right.
We did that for quite some time, and did the daily forecasts at and of course whenever I did that, I was very busy in high school. So the only time I did that was in the early morning hours, and I would wake up at around 4:30 in the morning to get those products out to people. And I think that is a great thing to learn in this. If you're majoring, if any high school or college students that are wanting to major, or is in the atmospheric science or meteorology business, is if you want to be really, really good at what you do, you just have to learn to live without a lot of sleep. And by that, I mean getting up very early and getting up very early in the morning to start your day. Because if you're like me, doing like a million things at a time, then you barely had time to maintain that. So you're pretty much working for pretty much most of the day. And that was my life during high school, and that's transitioned to college now, and I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest.
Yeah. And like I know that's one of the things that's been a little bit of a struggle for me whenever I do forecasting or anything that has to do with like a big social media presence. Is I'm someone who is very comfortable with waking up around noon or around those times, and I can build my schedules to where that works. So like being able to put out a forecast in the morning is something that I definitely like struggle with, and definitely like have to be way more vigilant to myself about. And after listening to a lot of broadcast meteorologists talk about stuff in the field and stuff that they really didn't know before they were entering in the weather business, is that for meteorologists, especially broadcast meteorologists, your hours are going to be unconventional. You're going to be going to the studio at 4 a.m., recording a morning, forecast thing, and then you might be done with work by noon, and then the rest of your day is kind of like your off time and stuff like that. And then there's also the fact that weather obviously doesn't constrict to time. You can have severe weather events at noon, or you can have severe weather events at 3 a.m. in the morning. And those broadcast meteorologists have to be there on site doing their forecasting and doing their weather events overnight at these really weird hours. That's one of those things that's like, it's definitely something that a lot of people don't, I think, take into account when they think about a lot of meteorology fields, and then they think about a lot of meteorology careers and positions, is that you have a lot of those weird hours, and it's definitely a task to be able to adapt to those.
Yeah, just like what your old pal James Spann commonly says, I haven't slept since 1974, because that's really that's when he was referring to the super outbreak of 1974, when he actually worked at when he was a senior in high school, and that really kind of defined his career on forward, because at that point his main priority was to protect and save lives of as many people as possible, whether that was in a major metropolitan area or if it's in a rural community. And that's one of the things that I really like about him, and what other meteorologists and forecasters in this field don't really get, and that it gets very irritating. Some of these major news stations here, especially here in North Texas, if you have like a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning that's in effect for a portion of the metroplex, of course they are on air and they do wall-to-wall coverage. But as soon as it leaves the major metropolitan area, they go back to the Bachelor or the Freak of the Week or whatever they put on television anymore. I don't know. I don't watch regular cable anymore, but. I think the thing back to what you were saying is one of the things that would behoove of you or any meteorology student that wants to have a job in the National Weather Service or in broadcast meteorology, eventually on their way to do severe weather coverage, is learn to live without a lot of sleep, work a regular hours, force your body to don't torture itself, but force your body to get out of the habit of waking up at noon, or try to be up like late at night, sometimes very early in the morning. Just a plethora of different sleep schedules. That way, when you're older in life and have to do on air work after midnight or in the pre-dawn hours, like you mentioned, it doesn't throw your whole body out, and you're more acclimated to being committed to do that type of stuff.
Yeah, I completely like the whole aspect of that. I kind of see like how you have to adjust your body, and I like how you brought up like James Spann and how he hasn't slept since like 1974. There's a lot of important aspects, I guess, about broadcast meteorology or like forecasting that people don't really understand. And
right, exactly.
It's something that like I'm glad you brought up, because a lot of times, you just see them on certain days of the week, but that doesn't mean that they don't work in their off time either.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of that also can be applied to people who do forecasting outside of a major news network or outside of professional meteorology. That a lot of times, like, you do have to adjust your schedule around the weather instead of trying to force the weather to adjust around your schedule. But that's one of those things that I definitely wanted to like bring up to you, Donovan, is like, especially with the growing presence of Twitter and with the growing presence of social media, you are seeing more and more student forecasting accounts and student forecasting and just, I guess, amateur forecasting being put into the spotlight and stuff like that. And I can, recall, Apex being one of the first ones that I ever saw, being on Twitter and stuff like that. And one of the ones that was the most influential to me. And so it's like, how do you like, I guess I'm trying to ask here is like, how important is not only student forecasting, to you, but also like, what are some of the like risks and dangers of that amateur forecasting compared to professional forecasting that you don't think gets touched on a lot, or that you kind of want to like bring up because of just the growing presence of it on social media?
Yeah, so let me address each one of your questions in the order that you asked.
Okay.
So, to me, student forecasting, especially for people my age, is I think that is very, very, very important. That student forecasting is brought in met with a positive, in a more positive light, where people are there to support each other and help one another get better, and learn how to create more credible forecasts with time, so that way they can build rapport within their respective regions and markets and communities. And you never know who might be reading your products. I mean, we have people all across the world on these social media platforms. So that's why I think it is very, very crucial that you, especially if you want to consider doing this seriously, that you present yourself in a light that is very professional and is helping foster growth within, not only within yourself, but kind of those other people that might be in your community. And that's why it is very important to consider. And I know, like, the whole weather Twitter is, it can be very, very helpful for a lot of young, inspiring forecasters and meteorologists and scientists, but it can be a turnoff and very detrimental to one's mental health whenever there's like drama or anything negative within that community. And of course, I don't really get involved with that because I don't have time for that. But one thing that I do want to put out there is, whenever you're critiquing someone's forecasts or someone's products, consider a bit of kindness whenever you're critiquing that, because you don't, just like with anyone, like, you don't know what that specific person that's putting putting their products out there is going through. And that ties into the whole thing of another point I want to bring up, is that a lot of people don't really consider this, but when we're in broadcast meteorology or social media forecasting or student forecasting, we are in the service industry. And that being said, it's very, very important to have a want to serve others, and I call it having a servant's heart. And
Right.
We're constantly, the whole thing with social media is that we're constantly evolving, especially in terms of weather Twitter and meteorology and forecasting on social media platforms. Nobody nowadays they're not going to stay up until 10 at night trying to watch some blow-dried boob on television to tell them what the weather is. Most people are going to get the information that they want on their smartphones, and we have to be very, very accommodating for those people. And if you have that if you don't have that mindset that you're truly in it to serve people rather than to just entertain your own mind adrenaline during these big severe weather days, then you have no hope. And I would advise you to not be in this business. And and another thing I want to bring up too is that I said something about big severe weather events. This goes on to the second part of your question of some of the downsides that come with social media forecasting. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of really good weather pages out there that always just want to be right. Everyone's right, and we're right, and this page is wrong. Do not trust this page. And I get it. It's a very competitive thing to do. I'm still very competitive, and I think that's a thing among men where we have this competitive mindset to be number one and win all these awards and try to get the most recognition. And that's especially true in the teenage years. But now that I'm a bit older, I realize that in the weather enterprise, it's very, very important. It's extremely important especially during big severe weather days or hurricanes or winter weather or any type of weather extreme. It's very, very important for all of the forecasters and meteorologists to be on the same page. Yeah, we might not communicate the message the same way, but it's very, very important for us to be on the same page. And I know people just like want I know some pages it's just they just want to be number one, and they want to create a whole bunch of advertisements and say we're the number one trusted source, and we are the first ones to predict Hurricane Dorian and Hurricane Laura nearly spot on before anyone else did. And quite honestly, I don't care about that stuff. All I care about
Right.
is making sure everyone in this business communicates the same message to the public, communicate the same level of impacts that any type of weather extreme might bring to the respective community that they're mentioning.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really, really good point there, because there is a little bit of clout chasing, for lack of a better term, that does happen with a lot of these, groups, and with these, forecasting teams, and with even independent forecasters themselves, who focus more on, trying to be the best than they do about the greater collective whole of what forecasting is all about, which is providing as much opportunity for the general public to understand what's happening with weather. Because the biggest thing about weather is that it is often and always unpredictable, and you will get things right, every now and then, like spot on every now and then, but that is more luck more of the time than it is genuine skill, and that, like, there are so many times where you can be as accurate as you possibly can be and still not be fully correct. And that's one of those things that, like, failure in essence brings, a better accuracy in the future, because you'll look at one event and you'll fail really hard on it, but then that allows you to be able to learn from that and get better at forecasting with that. And I think a lot of people take that as weakness and don't take that as room to grow and actually room to improve on your forecasting. Instead, take that as competition in a negative way. And so, like, it's one of those things about, like, just maturity, and about realizing that if you're going to be in the business of forecasting, and you're going to be in the business of the service industry when it comes to weather, you kind of have to take a hold and kind of really realize that, like, it's about protecting people, and it's about creating the best product you can create yourself to educate people and to get people just talking about the weather or looking at the weather and get prepared. Because it doesn't really matter, if you get, like, for instance, like, if there's like a severe tornado outbreak similar to the one that we had a couple days ago in Alabama, it doesn't matter if you only get 25 storms and there's a couple EF2s and EF3s, or if all of those are EF5s. No matter what, all of those have the power to do damage, and that's a lot of stuff. So it's not really like, oh, well, I called this is going to be a bust, or I didn't call this is going to be a bust, so I'm better, or I'm not better, or, like, I got to do this, but you didn't do that. It's like, that's not what this is about. What this is about is, given our resources, we were able to come up with forecasts and cover the weather to an audience that might not have cable, or to an audience that might not listen to TV meteorologists or watch TV meteorologists or any of that kind of stuff.
And on that point, Colin, I kind of want to add, like, I feel like for this high risk, everybody was kind of on edge and, issuing everybody about it, and you would see it everywhere. I feel like a lot of lives were saved. Like, I mean, I don't remember there being any, like, casualty reports at all.
Yeah, there wasn't a single one.
And that, I think, comes from the fact that meteorology and, like, broadcasting in your forecasts are also widely, like, being able to be found. Like, I know that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, like, I know that we put out some forecasts, and I know I've seen some, like, on Twitter that a lot of people had put out forecasts. And I feel like those being able to get out to the general public saved a lot of lives, along with, the meteorologist on TV.
Wednesday was like the Weather Communications Wednesday was a massive win in the weather enterprise, especially in the Deep South in Alabama, because if you recall, in on April 27th, 2011, 62 tornadoes touched down in Alabama, and 252 people died, and that was the last time a 45% hatched area was issued for that region in Alabama. Now, I'm not saying to compare to compare a Wednesday to April 27th per se, but Wednesday had the potential to be the worst outbreak that region has faced since April 27th, and just the fact that we were able to get through that high risk outbreak, that hatched area, without any confirmed fatalities as a direct result from the tornadoes is absolutely awesome. And that tells me that the social science research that has been conducted in that area since April 27th has paid off. It has clearly paid off. People are getting the message, because we saw this affect the effects of this social science research in the meteorology enterprise instantaneously. In 2011, the false alarm ratio from the National Weather Service in Birmingham was at 80%. In 2014, they were able to cut that down in half to 40%. And now, like 7 years later, that number is much lower. So this is just a sign of real progress. And another example of that, of real progress in the weather enterprise. One of the things we learned from the super outbreak is a lot of those lives could have been saved if people had a helmet in addition to being in their safe place. Because a lot of people that die from tornadoes, as we're finding, is they die from blunt force trauma to the skull region. So if they have a cheap bicycle helmet from Walmart or Target or your local academy, that can potentially save a life. And it's not just for kids too. It's for teenagers, adults, your grandma, everyone. They have like a helmet that can potentially save lives. But I still consider that a win in the weather enterprise. That with the whole helmet situation, there are many stores in central Alabama that were completely sold out of helmets, and that was just such a relieving fact that people were listening to the forecast products, getting the message, listening to their local meteorologists. And I consider that that we've come a long way. And of course, that doesn't take away to what happened in South Central Alabama or in Southwest Alabama. People call this event a quote unquote bust. Don't know the real human suffering that happened in places like Chilton County. There were some people, while we're thankful that like there were no fatalities in Alabama on Wednesday, and a lot of people got the warning. There are some people that lost their home in childhood, and there are some people that have been on this earth for many decades, and they were prepared as they can be. They lost their house and lost their home childhood right then and there, especially in South Chilton County and Moundville and all of these other places. There was still real human suffering in these rural communities of Alabama. And that's what people don't get, is just because there wasn't a major tornado go through downtown Tuscaloosa or downtown Birmingham or any of these major cities, doesn't take away from the fact that there was still real human suffering that day, and we need to be very sensitive and cognizant of that fact.
Yeah, and like, because I totally agree. Like, especially just like there were so many people that were like, I can't believe we broke the high risk streak with that. Like that didn't deserve a high risk. But you kind of think about like, especially back before I was really into severe weather at all, which is actually relatively recently. But like, I would see, oh, there's an enhanced risk. Meh, typical day. Like, oh, there's just normal storms and stuff like that. But if I saw a high risk, I'd be like, oh crap, I need to prepare. I need to make sure I have a plan in place. And so like, yes, maybe there weren't like, there probably weren't any major tornadoes, above an EF3. I mean, I haven't seen any storm reports or stuff like that, but I seriously doubt that there are any, EF5s or any EF4s, or else we would probably be talking about it and stuff like that. And there might have only been, between 20 to 30 storms or tornadoes that were actually on the ground. But, you think about what that environment was capable of producing. That's more of a luck thing, that we got really lucky that there weren't more tornadoes on the ground. And that still doesn't discount the fact that there were a lot of tornadoes on the ground. I remember I was in a programming class, and at one point there were 12 tornado warnings at once. And that is something I've never seen before. That is a lot of tornado warnings. And even if 2 or 3 of those only produced a tornado, the other 10 of those could have produced a tornado. They could have produced a sizable tornado. Some of those went over major cities and stuff like that too. So just because luck was on our side doesn't mean the high risk wasn't necessary. I mean, especially like the fact that, helmets were sold out at some of the stores and stuff like that. That's a testament to people paying attention to the high risk and people being like, has the potential to be dangerous. So let's get everything we can in place. And that's probably a lot of reasons why there weren't any fatalities from this, is the fact that everyone was prepared.
Right. And just to go off like the whole technicality of a high risk and what defines a tornado outbreak, if you have anywhere over a dozen tornadoes, just a dozen tornadoes, that is still considered a tornado. That's still considered a tornado outbreak, and that's what a high risk severe weather or tornado outbreak is expected. And you don't have to. And my point is, you don't have to have like 64 or 78 tornadoes in a 24-hour time span for a high risk to be considered quote unquote verified. No, of course, you have like the Super Tuesday outbreak, the April 14th, 2012 outbreak, and other I consider anomaly high risk days that like really really verified and the atmosphere was just super prime. But other high risk days are to not be discounted too. I remember the last high risk day that the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex experienced was April of 2007, I believe, and I do believe that event did produce enough tornadoes to be classified as a tornado outbreak. While it did not produce like strong tornadoes per se, that event still produced tornadoes, and that's another thing. High risk days are not just issued just because the parameters are off the chart. In some cases, a high risk may be issued for an area because there is high confidence that there will be a life-threatening emergency that will happen in these regions. And this was especially true in central Mississippi, because I know a lot of these communities in the deep south, especially in Mississippi, are low income areas income areas that do not have the luxury of having a designated tornado shelter or a designated safe place in their home. And a lot of those also don't have the requisite resources to get warnings on social media or on their phones or whatnot. And that was the reason why. And I talked to you about this before the event, Colin, that I was worried sick that there was going to be a humanitarian a kind of a mass casualty incident in these low income areas, because a lot of them don't have a really great homes that don't have really great foundation, and also those that have mobile homes. And don't get me wrong, mobile homes are really great, affordable places to live, but you cannot stay in a mobile home during a tornado, and it really doesn't take a strong tornado to completely destroy a mobile home. I've seen in many cases where EF1 high and EF1, EF2s completely destroy mobile homes and cause a whole bunch of issues and even some fatalities here and there.
Right. Exactly.
That in and of itself, and plus the fact that we would see tornadoes that had the potential to be twice that intensity going through these same low income areas that would be absolutely destroyed by these EF1 EF2s, or had the potential to be, at least. That was the very worrying factor, and we have to, as a weather community or weather enterprise, do a better job of reaching these low income areas, get weather radios in their homes, because like the cell service may be bad in these low income areas, but the NOAA weather radio doesn't operate on they don't operate on the cell network. They operate on their own network, and that way, if you're in the
Right.
middle of the night, you get the alert, a loud alarm sounds, and you can check the television to ascertain your situation. And a lot of low income areas don't really have that, and that's one of the things that I really want to see change in the weather enterprise, is that we need to be more committed to the rural areas, because I mean, I grew up in a relatively rural part in West Texas. I mean, I don't know if you consider Abilene rural, but rural enough.
Yeah. No,
So
exactly.
so that's my hope, is that we can better prepare the people that are in lower income areas.
Right. And that's one of those things that like yeah, as someone who's like really a big climate change activist and stuff like that, and or actually maybe I don't want to call myself an activist because I don't have like a big portfolio of activism, but someone who's very progressive on climate change, is that people kind of often ask me like, how does climate change really tie into a lot of the inequalities that the country's facing right now and that a lot of areas are facing right now? And I think this is a prime example of it, and like why we were so worried about this outbreak compared to maybe a high risk over Kansas or a high risk over Oklahoma is, while both places have rural areas and stuff like that, the rural areas in Kansas and Oklahoma and stuff like that tend to be a lot of farms and that kind of stuff. But those aren't necessarily low income farms. Those are just farms that are all spread apart and stuff like that. And that's not to say that those areas don't have low income areas, but the density and the prevalence of low income areas in the deep south is extremely higher than areas around here, just you due to it being an older region, due to the scars of years of racism and slavery, due to a lot of factors that go into that. And so with climate change, you're seeing this sort of shift into where the Dixie Alley and the deep south is becoming more of a hotspot for tornadoes than the old Tornado Alley is. And that's a big reason why climate change is so devastating, and why there needs to be a lot of work to stop climate change and a lot of climate justice, is because you're seeing this shift from a place that has spent years and years being able to handle these tornadic outbreaks and be able to bounce back against tornado outbreaks. Because you see Moore, Oklahoma. Moore, Oklahoma has been hit by so many EF5s and so many EF4s and EF3s, and that this kind of area where I'm at right now in OKC is so prepared for these storms to keep happening, because that's what we've been growing up with. That's what everyone around here has been growing up with for decades. But the deep south, not as much. You don't get as many tornadoes there, at least in the past. But now, because climate change is ravaging our planet so much, you're seeing the shift of the alley kind of over there. It might not necessarily be confirmed, but you're kind of seeing it to where that's becoming the new hotspot for tornadoes. And unfortunately, those low income areas aren't able to, as you said, aren't able to be as prepared due to structural inequalities with their houses and all that kind of stuff, and poverty and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, it's really important that, we realize climate change is a big existential threat, because it does factor into a lot of these inequalities through the shifting of weather patterns to, and this isn't the weather, being like targeting people, or like, because, the weather obviously doesn't have a mind of its own. But that's why, climate change activism and work is so important to me, is because, if we stay on this continued path, these low income areas in the deep south are going to be getting hit a lot more, and they don't have the resources to deal with it.
Right. And the whole thing with the separation of Dixie Alley and Tornado Alley is that you're always going to see these photogenic either ropes, stovepipes, wedges, or even wedges in some cases in these in the Central Plains and even in the Southern Plains. And the whole thing with the Deep South is that I've researched this a little bit, and I've noticed that the Deep South tend to have more tornadoes that are rain wrapped and that are very difficult to see until it's too late. And it's not like another thing is with the terrain in the Deep South. It's not like the plains where it's just flat land and you can see the storm from miles away. But with like Mississippi, Alabama, and all of those other adjacent states, is their terrain. They might have like a mountainous terrain. There are more hills and trees in part of central Alabama and parts of Mississippi. And plus, combined with the tornadoes being rain wrapped in some cases, they won't know until it's literally right at their doorstep. So that is why Dixie Alley is more dangerous not only for from a chaser standpoint, but also from a just a regular resident during like their severe weather season. And I've looked into this that if I'm not mistaken, I wouldn't say a lot more. They tend to have more violent EF4 and EF5 tornadoes than in the central plains.
Right.
That makes it even more dangerous, combined with the fact that those violent tornadoes are rain wrapped. I mean, heck, even as rare as EF5s are, I mean, there have only been 59 recorded F5 or EF5 tornadoes since 1950. But those that, like, I'm just worried that like one of these days there's gonna be one of those storms that ends up producing that tornado that does a lot of damage to the low income areas. And that's one of the things that we need to do. We need to get them as prepared as possible, and to, of course, the weather radio, and have helmets on their storm shelter, and in addition to a bunch of other supplies, so we can mitigate the amount of loss of life as possible. In some cases, people got the warning with these outbreaks. People got the warning, did what they could, took shelter, hunkered down, and they still lost their life. It was just their day to die. They have their set day to live and their set day to die. It was just their day, and there's really not much you can do with that. And we also have to take that into account whenever we're we're researching what happened, and are conducting autopsy studies, and are doing death counts when in wake of these big days.
Yeah, and it's a scary reality, that, like, I think something that might get lost among weather enthusiasts is that the true danger of these storms and stuff like that. And the danger doesn't ever come from people who are, sorry, it does occasionally, but like most of the danger from tornadoes are not the people who are going out of their way to seek them. It's the people who don't know they're coming, and that's why, as dangerous as storm chasing is, you rarely see storm chasing deaths or storm chasing injuries. In fact, I can only really name a couple ever that I can think of, but most of the damage comes from people who aren't aware of the weather, and people who are just sitting in their homes, not realizing what could be coming towards them, And so it's one of those like stark realities that, like, there is a really great chance for casualties whenever you have tornadoes, and it's something you always have to be prepared to see, and be prepared to understand whenever you're dealing with severe weather. But on I guess on a happier note, I would say, I do kind of have just like one final question for you as we kind of wrap this up. But so obviously, you mentioned that you're going to be a music major at SMU and that kind of stuff. How do you see weather continuing as a big presence in your life, if it does continue a big presence in your life? Because, I'm sure as you go through college, you'll continue student forecasting and stuff like that. But eventually, you'll go on to your job and stuff like that. So how are you going to keep weather a big part of your life as you move on in the future? Or is that something that you even really know about yet?
I know that weather is always going to be a very big part of one of my characteristics as a person, because I mean I as much as social media forecasting can be irritating and busy at times, that type of busyness I absolutely love, and I don't know how I would live without. So that being said, I don't know how long I'm going to continue doing this. Heck, I might even do it like even through my professional job, whatever that might be.
Right.
But I uh, I would say that I will continue doing it for the foreseeable future, and through doing it, I want to reframe what I want to reframe the weather preparedness, especially during severe weather here in Dallas Fort Worth, because there's not really an emphasis in weather preparedness here in North Texas, in the Dallas Fort Worth market. Um, just like
Yeah, I totally
just
agree.
as an example of that, remember the Garland Rowlett EF4 on December 26, 2015? 11 people,
Yeah, that was
11
crazy.
people died from in that tornado, and of those 11 people, 9 of those people were in their cars. Why? People
Right.
driving whenever there's a tornado going through, and I don't think that we're doing a good job as a weather enterprise in the Dallas Fort Worth market of emphasizing the dangers of being in a tornado when you are in your vehicle, and also the importance of having a helmet. And I mean, that's a really good note for the Deep South. But those are also the research that we've done for the super or from the super outbreak are also principles that we need to apply immediately to the Central Plains, because while the Deep South might get the most violent tornadoes of any given year, you still have that fair share of that in the Central and Southern Plains. So during in my time continuing forecasting, I want to normalize making sure people know where they are on the map, making sure people know where to go if in their home, and not only in their home, but if they're in the mobile home, what business or building site built structure they need to go to whenever they have a tornado warning, and the importance of having helmets, air horns, and closed sole shoes. And during these severe weather events, there's not a lot of emphasis on that, and that's really the whole reason. Well, not whole reason per se, a really big reason of why I started Apex is to bring these same principles and these preparedness strategies um, kind of foster bringing these preparedness strategies into this region.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really great motive to have, because I think it's one of those things that, like, you think about where the tornado hotspots are, and Dallas is considered in that tornado alley, and it's the largest city in a tornado region, because you look at the cities that are bigger than it: Houston, New York, LA, Chicago. Chicago has its, rare tornado every now and then, but Dallas is the only one of, those major cities that is right in the heart of, and right in the region of, a pretty strong tornadic activity. And I think a lot of people have that kind of mindset that, like, cities are immune to tornadoes, but there have been plenty of times where Dallas and Dallas proper has been hit by a tornado. You look at the 2000 tornado that went through downtown Fort Worth and scoured some of the buildings and got some of the damages to the glass there. You look at even recent tornadoes in DFW, such as the one that happened in Arlington, just November of last year. You look at the October ones that have happened, through like North Dallas and Richardson, and those were pretty intense tornadoes. And the Rowlett tornado, like you just mentioned from 2015, all of those are out of season technically because all those happen later in the year. But it's one of those things that, like, not only is the city not immune to tornadoes and stuff like that, especially just due to the high density of infrastructure. I mean, there's a decent chance that if a tornado touches down anywhere in the Metroplex, it's going to cross an interstate or it's going to cross a major highway. And you might have people on that highway to where, oh gosh, like this is where we have a dangerous event. But not in addition to that, tornadoes can happen at any time of the year in DFW. Like genuinely, they can happen in October, November, December, March, May, April, anytime. And anytime that happens, like, you have to be prepared. And, the city doesn't have a bubble over it. Well, we've been lucky to where we haven't had the same things that OKC has had to face with, some of the El Reno tornadoes or with the Moore tornadoes and stuff like that. Dallas is only 2.5 hours south of it. We are in just as good of a position, even if not a better position, just because of some of the flatness around us to where a major tornado event can happen. And so I think, just because we've gotten lucky and just because we are in a major city does not mean you can't have a weather preparedness plan. And it doesn't mean you can't be weather aware.
Right. And a lot of people don't really know this, but like they're really on tap to the severe weather season and the typical March, April, and May. But
right.
I firmly believe that we here, and especially here in North Texas or Texas in general, we have a late severe weather season that tends to happen in October, some portions of mid to late October, and then November into December. I really do believe that that late severe weather season can also be another strong tornado produce a really strong tornado producer. It may still produce hail, but that late severe weather season, like I mentioned, that season really does do a good job of producing tornadic storms than I would say a regular severe weather season, because here in Dallas Fort Worth, especially Denton, Colin counties, some portions of Rockwall and northern Dallas County, that's a very famous hail corridor, as we've learned over the past.
Oh yeah, especially Colin County.
And of course, you still get those tornado events from that, but of course not as common. But the late severe weather season is also a season where we have to be on the lookout for tornadic activity.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And especially with the way this year is shaping up to be, looks to be a pretty active year for severe storms. And I'm excited to, do some forecasting with you, and I'm excited that, Apex is now into the OKC area, although minimally, but I'm working on that. But I very much am, grateful just for what you've done, at least, for my forecasting abilities, and then also just for the entire DFW Metroplex area with being able to provide not only consistent forecasting, but also, a weather-aware, weather preparedness mindset to everything. And I always really enjoy seeing your takes on events and what you have to do with everything. And I also very much loved everything you said, during this podcast. This was, I very much agree with a lot of these points and stuff like that. And I always really enjoy hearing you talk about this stuff.
Thank you, Colin. So it was a pleasure being on this on this podcast. Like I said, it's been years since, it's been like almost half a decade since I'd done one of these, and like I thought it was going to be out of color, but of course I've done a lot of research in that time, and I got to start doing these more often. But very kind, very very kind of what you said, very very kind.
Yeah, but and hey, this is only our third podcast, so we still don't really know what we're
Not at
we like talking about things, whether or not. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
You want to plug any of your stuff, so the viewers can come look at your pages?
Oh yeah, so so you can find me Apex. You can find me on Facebook, ApexStorm, Dallas Fort Worth Weather Authority. I really have to change that because we're in Oklahoma. We're in Central Oklahoma now. But you can find me on Facebook. Find me on Twitter at DonoWX, and you can find Colin on Twitter at WeltyWX. I believe I got that right. And and you can always if you're in the Dallas Fort Worth region, you can text at ApexStorm to 81010 daily weather forecasts, and of course weather warnings anywhere in the region. Also, you can also do the same thing if you're in the Oklahoma City or in Southern Oklahoma or even in the Stillwater area. You can get text message forecasts daily. You can text at ApexOKC to 81010.
Exactly. Anyway, so yeah, really appreciate having you on here a whole bunch, and I wish you the best of luck for the rest of the severe season and the rest of the year moving forward too.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right. I just want to thank Donovan Neal for coming on. That was an amazing interview. I had a really good time, and I definitely hope to have him back on again. Before we close out this podcast, I just want to say, go check out our chase video on Suscore. It has been posted, and it was amazing to make, and it took a while, so I'd love, if you guys share it, like it, even subscribe. I know that not everybody subscribes, and I understand YouTube's, you don't have to always watch, but if you are interested in my podcast and you want to be interested in the rest of the Suscore content, go give us a subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on suscore.wx on Instagram and suscorewx on Twitter. And I just want to wish you guys that you guys have a great week and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.